Just to remind you, this semester that we are focusing on the Sermon on the Mount, which was Jesus' first teaching, recorded teaching, and that can be found in Matthew 5 through 7. And this morning, we're going to read, you have a piece of paper in front of you. This will be reading this passage, but we're going to be hearing it from some different translations. And so I'm going to have Casey go ahead and play Isaac's first, and then it's in German, and then we'll be having Steve. If you could say what language you're reading in, and also Kayla would be after that. If you guys can come to the mics down here. Go ahead.
Ihr seid für die Welt wie Salz. Wenn das Salz aber fade geworden ist, wodurch soll es seine Würzkraft wiedergewinnen? Es ist nutzlos geworden. Man schüttet es weg und die Leute treffen darauf herum. Ihr seid das Licht, das die Welt erhellt. Eine Stadt, die oben auf einem Berg liegt, kann nicht verborgen bleiben. Man zündet ja auch keine Öllampe an und stellt sie dann unter einen Eimer. Im Gegenteil, man stellt sie auf den Lampenständer, sodass sie allen im Haus Licht gibt. Genauso soll euer Licht vor alle Menschen leuchten. Dann werden sie eure guten Taten sehen und euren Vater im Himmel preisen.
I'll be reading Matthew 5:13 to 15 in my language. It's Bengali. তোমরা পৃথিবীর লবণ, কিন্তু লবণের স্বাদ যদি যায় তবে তাহা কি প্রকারে লবণের গুণাবৃষ্টিতে করা যাইবে, যাহা আর কোনো কার্যে লাগিবে না, কেবল বাহিরে ফেলিয়া দেবার ও লোকের পদতলে দলিত হবার যোগ্য হয়। তোমরা জগতের দীপ্তি। পর্বতের উপর স্থিত নগর গুপ্ত থাকিতে পারে না, আর লোকের প্রদীপ জ্বালিয়া কাঠার নিচে রাখে না, কিন্তু দীপাধারের উপরেই রাখে, তাহাতে তাহা গৃহস্থলিত সকল লোকের আলো দেয়। তদ্রূপ তোমাদের দীপ্তি মনুষ্যদের সাক্ষাতে উজ্জ্বল হোক, যেন তাহারা তোমাদের সৎক্রিয়া দেখিয়া তোমাদের স্বর্গস্থ পিতার গৌরব করে। আমেন।
You're reading the same passage, Matthew 5:13 to 16, but in Spanish. Vosotros sois la sal de la tierra, pero si la sal se desvaneciere, ¿con qué será salada? No sirve más para nada, sino para ser echada fuera y hollada por los hombres. Vosotros sois la luz del mundo. Una ciudad asentada sobre un monte no se puede esconder, ni se enciende una luz y se pone debajo de un almud, sino sobre el candelero y alumbra a todos los que están en la casa. Así alumbre vuestra luz delante de los hombres, para que vean vuestras buenas obras y glorifiquen a vuestro Padre que está en los cielos.
So you may or may not know this, that the college that you're attending is a part of the Quakers, or the Friends denomination, Friends movement. If you don't know this too, in history, that the Quakers, the Friends, were a huge part of freeing slaves. That there was a lot of what happened in our history had to do with them being a part of the Underground Railroad, but also advocating for freeing slaves. I don't know if this is correct, and I read this in a couple places, but as a movement, as a denomination, the Friends tried to tell everybody within their denomination, we believe slavery is wrong. And so as a denomination, they moved forward to try to have everyone who were Quakers to release their slaves, because they didn't believe that it was a part of God's economy for equality. So last week, as I was thinking about this chapel, I sent an email out to several Friends leaders from all across our nation. And I asked them if they would give me some names of Quakers from our history of ethnic diversity, because I wanted to share those people with you today. And as I sent that email out, probably to 20 people across our country, people who've been a part of Quaker history for a long time, there was a blaring question that was very obvious to us that rose to the surface. It's actually the same question that I think Aaron Stokes, our town, the mayor of our town, who came to this summer. And I just want to read this to you. It says, Over and over again, I received the same response that I was experiencing on my own research. Quakers believe so strongly in equality. If that is the case, then why don't we see more notable Quakers in the first 3 centuries of the movement? I ran across a book that's been written recently, and the title of it is Fit for Freedom. That's who Quakers were. We wanted everybody to be free, but not for friendship. And so for me, in my own personal journey, in my history, both of my grandfathers were Quaker ministers. I come to a moment of lamenting as a denomination. I take a moment to lament that we lost some generations there. And it's important to me when I think about moving forward, there's my desire that that come back. So this morning, we're going to have Charity and Jesse come in. They're going to share a couple of biographies with you. I did receive 2 names over and over again from these 20 people, and these were the 2 names emerged as people from our history, especially from our Black Quaker history, who were a part of the movement. So Charity's going to come first, and then Jesse will come.
I'm going to be reading the story of Cyrus Bastille. Cyrus Bastille was born enslaved in Burlington, New Jersey, the son of European American attorney Samuel Bastille and one of his enslaved Africans. Samuel Bastille sold his son to Quaker Thomas Pryor, a baker who taught Cyrus his trade. Pryor liberated Bastille in 1769, making him one of the 104 enslaved Africans manumitted or set free by Quakers in Burlington Quarterly Meeting of Friends from 1763 to 1796. As a freed enslaved African, Bastille successfully operated a baking business for many years. During the Revolutionary War, he baked bread in Burlington for the Continental troops. Cyrus's bakery clientele also included both white and Black families, all of whom he treated with dignity and respect. Here is a favorite story told by Cyrus. One day, he was driving his wagon along a country road to make a delivery. He encountered a buggy that was moving along the same road, rather slowly, but fast enough to kick up dust in his face and on his goods. Soon he recognized the driver as a local judge, accustomed to tarry as he chose, feeling certain in his social position. Cyrus decided he had eaten enough dust, encouraged his horses, and passed the judge, leaving him to eat dust. He knew he was as good a man as any other. The judge recognized Cyrus and shouted to him that he would buy no more bread from his shop. Cyrus shouted, "So be it, Judge." The sass. Later, the judge, missing his tasty bread, returned to Cyrus's shop, purchased bread, and became his friend. Both men understood each other and the situation, but showed dignity and respect. Later, Cyrus moved to Philadelphia, where he became a leader of that city's Black community. In 1787, he became one of the founders of Philadelphia's Free African Society. This group promoted education for the children of their families, care for the poor, and protection from capture of runaway slaves. He was one of the first to contribute funds for starting St. Thomas's African Episcopal Church in 1792. In 1797, Bastille retired from his business and built a house where he opened a school for African American children in 1803. The Bastille family recorded several generations of Black Quaker leaders. 2 of them were conductors of the Underground Railroad. All of them were, abolitionists. David Bastille, as a teenager, was like Harriet Tubman, a conductor on the Underground Railroad and claimed to help over 1,000 enslaved people escape to freedom. Gertrude Bastille Moselle, who was one of the first Black women journalists and journal editors in America. The Bastille family were faithful attenders of various Quaker meetings in the Philadelphia yearly meeting for over 4 generations.
Story of Paul Cuff. Paul Cuff was born in Massachusetts into a family of 10 children. His father was a manumitted enslaved African and a member of the Akan tribe of Ghana. Paul Cuff's mother was a Native American of the Wampanoag tribe from Martha's Vineyard. Ebenezer Slocum, a member of the Society of Friends, purchased Paul's father in the 1720s, and 22 years later, John Slocum purchased Paul's father from his uncle Ebenezer and freed him in 1745. Paul taught himself mathematics, navigation, and other seafaring skills, and earned his wealth through whaling and trade in the Americas and Europe. His shipping career began at the age of 16, when he signed up to be a member of a whaling vessel. Cuff began building his shipping enterprise during the Revolutionary War, and over a period of years, he owned shares in up to 10 ships. During the war, he built a boat with his brother David, and the two of them smuggled merchandise through British blockades. During that period in American history, the shipping industry was dangerous because of the constant threat of pirates. But purchasing and delivering merchandise on the Atlantic coast, specifically in the South, was particularly hazardous for Cuff and his crew because they were all African American. In 1793, Congress passed a fugitive slave law that gave owners of enslaved Africans the right to retrieve an escaped enslaved person from another state. The enslaved were not entitled to a trial, a hearing, or able to testify for themselves. This law put Cuff and his crew in continual peril of being kidnapped and sold. Paul Cuff saw education as a means of liberation, and he fought for equal rights in many ways. He was always eager to teach young men who wanted to learn the science of navigation and skills of a merchantman. In 1799, he established a school on his own property in Westport, Massachusetts, that was open to all children, regardless of their race. In 1800, he bought a grist mill and was a century and a half ahead of his time when he urged mills to include African Americans in the planning stages of organizations whose goal was helping blacks. He encouraged African Americans up and down the East Coast to think about their social and economic status. In 1780, when only men of European descent had the right to vote, he and other African Americans protested taxation on his father's estate on the grounds of no taxation without representation. Paul dressed in the manner of Friends, wearing Quaker gray along with a wide-brimmed black hat. In mid-September 1810, Cuff shared a leading he was experiencing with his Quaker meeting to establish a trading community in Sierra Leone that would trade goods instead of humans. He thus embarked on efforts to establish settlements on Africa's west coast and to develop trade routes to the area. In 1811, he founded Friendly Society of Sierra Leone and subsequently sailed there. Later that year, he journeyed to England, where he met with British abolitionists and sought support for his resettlement plans. He eventually secured a land grant. In 1812, Cuff returned to the United States, at which time his cargo was seized on charges that he broke the 1807 Embargo Act, which restricted imports from Great Britain. Cuff traveled to Washington, D.C., where he met with U.S. President James Madison, who ordered the release of his cargo. In December 1815, Cuff and 38 black settlers sailed for Sierra Leone, and they landed in February 1816. It's about a 3-month journey. He returned to the United States later that year and sought backing for another voyage. However, his health soon began to decline, and he died the following year. He wrote a memoir of Captain Paul Cuff in 1811.
A question that I often ponder after hearing stories like that, or even yesterday in the middle of remembering MLK, is where would our world be now without these people? Just take a minute to think about that. Where would our world be without them? I know that I hear a rumor around campus that students don't check their email. Is this true? What? Well, maybe you know this or don't know this, but last week I did send out an email to each one of you asking if any of you would be willing to be a part of helping plan this chapel. And just to let you know, I didn't receive back one response of anybody willing to help. And I'm okay with that. It's just more of a question of me going, tell me more. Tell me why. Because we want you to be a part of what's happening here on campus. I did have one student volunteer. It was actually a person who's new this semester. So I went to the chapel planning team yesterday and it said, what do you all want to do? And so we decided instead that what we would do is we would take 3 of those questions that we sent out to you in email that were going to be used for a panel and to use them as open worship today for us. And if you don't know what open worship it is, it's just the idea of us listening on behalf of God and then coming and sharing what's on our heart. And so I know it's scary to think about coming to a mic. We tried to put them down here on the ground so you wouldn't have to go on the stage. But I'd like to invite you with all my heart to be a part today of worship, to share and respond to these questions. I want to remind you also that as we listen to people sharing, I want to encourage you to listen to understand them, not to defend your beliefs or to want to argue, but to truly listen to the people who share. And also remember that it takes great courage to come up and stand up in front of your peers and to respond. And so if you would just take about 30 seconds just to center your hearts this morning, just on the Lord, just to invite him into this space. He's already here, but just take about 30 seconds to do that. God, please help us to hear this morning with your ears. Amen. So here's the first question this morning. It's, go into the next one, Casey. I think I can say it to you while you can start thinking about it. How has your life been impacted by diversity? That's the first question this morning. How has your life been impacted by diversity?
I had the awesome opportunity to go on a juniors global trip to South Africa. And while there, we worked with a YWAM group. If you're not familiar with YWAM, it's abbreviated for Youth with a Mission. And so they're there for how many weeks or months? 3 months. Oh, 3 weeks, right. Oh, we were there for 3 weeks. They were there for 3 months. Yeah. And with YWAM, I mean, they're people from all over the world. Very different backgrounds, very different walks of life. But being there, working with them, even just for those short 3 weeks, it really felt like a family. And we just kind of popped in and kind of popped out, but they were just so welcoming. And, how can a group of people who have basically nothing in common be so family-like? And the answer is Christ. And how, with diversity, for it to be truly celebrated, is to celebrate that we are created in different ways, and we're supposed to be, because we reflect God differently. We understand God differently. So being there really impacted my life. I got to see God in different view. Not same God, but I've heard God being described as a diamond with infinite amount of sides, and I got to see several different sides of God.
Sorry. Like Charity said, like she saw God in different way, but to me in India, like, I think 2019, I saw God from different country in one way. Like it was like an Asian conference, and there was like 10, 12 countries, and the last day we like all one person from every country, we gathered together and planned to do worship together, even though it was like people from different countries, different languages, and different styles. Then we sat together and we planned, and the last day we worshiped God. And that time I realized that how wonderful is our God. Like every country, there was India, 3 parts of India, and Nepal, Bhutan, Indonesia, Thailand. I think Tyree was there too, from America. And we was worshiping God as one. And that reminds me that even though we are different, but our Father is one. Our Father is one, and we are children of God. And we are not different, we are one. So.
When I was younger, my sister was in a show called Aida, and that show was about the Egyptians and the Nubians coming together in a love story. And that doesn't have much to do with the diversity that I'm going to share with you today, but my sister had her hair done by a basketball player that went to the college that she was going to do the show with. And she got her hair done in cornrows, and it took about 7 hours. And that's a really long time, but she was there, and I got to sit and watch the whole process happen. And she was doing, one of the black basketball girls there was doing it because that was something in her culture that she did commonly. And as she was doing my sister's cornrows, she was telling her about all the stories of her culture, and my sister and her were comparing it. And they got to really bond together for those 7 hours of that day. And they never really saw each other again because they had different lives and that sort of thing. My sister was still in high school, just taking some dual credit classes there. And the girl was doing her basketball scholarship and doing her own thing. So they didn't see each other very often. But for those 7 hours, they bonded, and they were like sisters just for a little while. They got to come together and get to know each other and compare their different lifestyles. And that was really, really neat, and my sister and I both remember that. I was little, just sitting in the back, watching it, listening. Wasn't really a part of it, but my sister and her really got to bond together. Another way of diversity that I've had that impacted my life more than my sister's was Keith White. He has a supper at his house every Sunday, and he has lots of people come, and we get to make food, and we get to share each other's cultures through our food and that sort of thing. And I just find that really amazing. We get to try all new things and talk about the cultures that from the food, like it spurs on the culture talk and that sort of thing. And it's really great bonding time for all of us.
Hello. Hey, so I grew up in Haviland, Kansas. I didn't see a lot of diversity growing up, let's just be honest, right? But one thing that was really interesting is probably one of the first times I ever actually experienced it. I went to Mexico for a missions trip, and I got there, and I'm like, I have no idea how to interact with these people. I can't even speak their language. And so I'm like, ¿Cómo se dice? ¿Cómo se dice? And they were like, they were very patient with me on how to learn Spanish, because obviously I had no clue, didn't even take Spanish in high school. But one thing that I just loved about that culture is when we worshiped on Sunday, they would be singing a song, and I knew the melody, and I would sing it in my own English words. And my friend Miguel, he would look over at me and be like, "That's beautiful." I'm like, dude, English is nothing. Like you guys singing like that is way more beautiful than my crappy English. And so after that, I just kind of had a hunger for all right, how do other people worship? And then I guess as I came home, I started to look around our local area, and man, there's a lot more than I actually expected. There's different spiritual giftings. I've noticed that diversity in spiritual giftings. I can't play piano. I cannot do basketball. It's terrible. I throw a ball and it just bounces off the backboard, right? I suck at it. And then I guess what I'm saying is that all of that diversity, that you have to look for it. You have to hunger for it. You have to want to learn. You have to want that diversity in order to get anything from it. Otherwise, you'll just sit and think that the whole world around you is just the same. So.
For me, my best friend back home is biracial. He's got his dad is black and his mom's white, and there's so much culture and music and, oh my gosh, food. His dad makes the greatest barbecue I've ever had in my life that I would have missed out on had I not had him in my life. And God has been present in all of that, going over to his house and having meals with his family. I got to meet so many interesting and incredible people, because his brother would be giving haircuts in his basement half the time when I came over. All of that, God is present in all of that, and I got to experience God and continue to be able to experience God in so many different ways that I would have not been able to had I not met him.
So I guess how diversity impacted me in my life personally. For those who don't know, I'm an MK. Yep, there we go. MK is a missionary kid. So my family and I were missionaries to Mexico. And yep, there you go. As another part of my testimony, our parents sat us down one night. I think I was 7, in Mississippi, hadn't been out of the country, and my dad said, "We are missionaries, and we're going to Mexico," and he basically explained what that meant. And I personally remember hating the idea of leaving the country. I didn't want to be a missionary. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go outside my comfort zone and what I thought was home. Later that same year, we traveled down to Mexico for like a few days, probably like a week at most. And just through that time, I immediately fell in love with the country. I wanted to go back badly, so badly. And then in like 2013, we officially like moved down to Mexico and started our our training there, or time there. And just more and more, I loved it. You know, I've now consider Mexico as my second home. You know, I just love the people so much. It changed me so much. I got the chance to see how other cultures react, how other people are. And essentially, we're not that different. You look at Mexico, and I looked at the United States, you know, we're all broken people who need Jesus. And besides culture, besides, you know, possibly color, we're not that different. We're, you know, people all looking for Jesus, all needing him, and all needing community. So.
So I grew up in small town Indiana, which is a lot like Haviland, Kansas, if I'm being honest. But my first year after I graduated, I decided to take a gap year, and I went to South Carolina for a year. And it was a really awesome experience that I would never take back for anything. But in this gap year, I was put in this building with 30 people, and we got to live life together, and we got to travel together and learn about ourselves and learn about God and learn about community. And like from the start, it was like a culture shock because I had never really been outside of my bubble a whole lot. Like I had gone places, I had, you know, traveled around the Eastern Coast a little bit, but I had never experienced being put in a place with people who weren't like me. And it's not just color, it's not just race, but it's people's stories, it's cultures, it's experiences. And me and my roommate really did not mesh well together. Not only were we not, you know, the same color, not the same race, but our stories were really different, and how we grew up was really different. And that was just like the start of a beautiful journey that the Lord took me on. And in my intercultural ministries class that I took through this gap year program, we went to this place in Atlanta, Georgia, that is a place where refugees come in, and they actually help equip refugees to live life and to do life in America. And in this little town called Clarkston, Georgia, that's just on the outside of Atlanta, they have probably 100 countries represented. And you walk down the street and there are restaurant after restaurant after restaurants from all of these different places all over the world. And there's this little coffee shop called Refuge that really impacted me a lot more than I ever thought it could. But there were all of these workers from different countries coming together and just making coffee and drinking coffee and talking about God. And it really started to show me just the beauty of the church. And not the church as an institution, but the church as a body of people coming together and being one. It talks about in Acts how all of these people came together and were one, and there were no differences. They were different people, they were different cultures, they were different stories, but they were coming together and they were one because that's who God is. And this experience and going to all these different places and going all across the U.S. and even overseas is just a picture of what the church is supposed to be and what the church is when we come together and we lay down our differences and look at who God is and who we are in God and the beauty of our stories, but the beauty of who we are together, with our stories coming together like puzzle pieces, because we only have a little bit of the puzzle. Small town Indiana is only a little bit of the puzzle. And so my life is just a small piece, just as your life is just a small piece. So, yeah.
Hello. Okay, so one of my best friends back home, she's this beautiful, tall, white girl, right? And she falls in love with the most amazing mixed man I have ever met. And just seeing their relationship and how they just love each other and how their relationship has impacted her view of race relations in America and in the world. She grew up in this white conservative family that they didn't talk about it. Her dad freaked out, and it took a lot of processing for her family to be okay with them getting married. But watching them fall in love and watching them have those hard conversations just inspired me so much. And at their wedding, their unity symbol, some people mix sand, you know, some people do paint. They made chocolate milk together, and it was beautiful. And just having conversations, it's amazing. It was great. It was the best thing I've ever seen at a wedding. But they made their chocolate milk, and I've just been able to talk to her about how she's had these conversations with her dad, how she's had these conversations with her family, that is really changing her family's beliefs about Black people, which is huge for her. And that inspired me to, you know, not just be quiet at family gatherings when people are being, you know, conservative and just, you know, when they're saying really racist things that isn't okay, you know? So it inspired me to stand up against that and to speak out against it and to actually sit and listen to people and listen to their stories and listen to their cultures. I got a chance last semester to talk with Helen about her life, sorry Helen, and her family, and she just told me her history of how her family came to the US, and it was amazing. I loved that conversation, and just seeing how my friend Haley and Lorenzo, how they love each other and how they're, how she listened to him and how she comes alongside him and now how they're one because they're married, right? And how they work together as a unit and just the way that she loves him, the way that she's learned from him, the way that she's taking the step to ask questions, to listen, and to speak out, gave me a lot of courage to just ask Helen questions about it, you know, instead of just like stopping with one question and being like, oh yeah, that's cool. I was like, tell me more. I want to know everything. So, yeah, that's all.
Well, I think that's where we're going to land today is tell me more. If there's something that someone shared here that you just want to learn more about, ask them to tell me more. And I do want to encourage you to remember that, to hear with God's ears, to hear these other person's experiences. I'm going to invite you to do two things. One is if you want to have further conversation about this, please come and see me at my office. It's on the 3rd floor of Phillips. I have candy. I'm the creepy lady with candy. So come see me. I'd love to hear from you. And then also, the sheet of paper that I handed you, it has Matthew 5 on it. This is going to be our benediction today, but we're going to do it a little bit different. If you'll notice in it, there's a place to fill in a name. And we'd like to actually ask you to turn to your neighbor and that you would speak over them as a blessing, this passage. So find out who that is next to you, and maybe you can come close to someone. Just use their first name. Why don't we stand together and take a moment to read this to one another. Okay, I'm just going to use Casey's name in here because he's back in the back and does so much for us. But let's read these out loud together. So, you, Casey, are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You, Casey, are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light, Casey, shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Amen? On your way out, I'm going to have 2 people at the doors. Sarah, if you could go to one, and I just need another volunteer, grab somebody at the other door. It's very important to us that we get your feedback. And so if you could take time to fill this out, and you can give it to me at the cafeteria, or I will email it today. It's called an email. And if you want to get it on Google Doc, you can respond to it that way instead of writing it down. So I'm going to make sure Sarah and somebody else are at the back doors. I think the other door is already going. So go in peace today.